So it's been a pretty long time since I have actually taken a look at a mid-range device, but the Galaxy A series, which is a series I haven't watched that much, seems to have gotten really popular over the years. So I thought I would actually take a look at the Galaxy A54 and see just how much better mid-range devices have gotten. So I have a few things to share with you all about my experience using this device for as long as I have now. Now, for anybody who has seen these Weeks Later videos I do, you will know that I try to go over every single aspect, and there was actually a lot here and I had to kind of shorten this so this video wasn't so long. But this is not a review, I promise you. This is just basically my rough thoughts on a few aspects of this device. So let's go ahead and get right into that. So the first thing I noticed about this phone when I laid hands on it was that the plastic rail around it it's kind of different from what you would expect on a flagship device. And people who have used the A54 series are probably used to this, but it did stick out to me. I've personally always had a device with some kind of aluminum frame around it, at least when Samsung started making devices with aluminum after the Galaxy S5 and the Galaxy Note 3, and I never thought I'd feel the difference between plastic and metal, a metal frame. And I'm not saying that this is a bad thing or it's anything other than just kind of something I noticed, but it's just noticeable, you know? If you've been using a Samsung device or any device with a armor aluminum frame or aluminum frame, it will be a little bit of a departure, and it does kind of, I don't want to say it makes the phone feel cheap, but you'll notice it. You'll definitely notice that. I guess it just kind of surprised me because I thought we were at the point where materials like aluminum were cheaper to the point where they could be used on any device in any price range, and it feels like Samsung is trying to remind you that you didn't purchase one of their more expensive devices. The durability of this frame also does kind of worry me, since I feel like it can be chipped pretty easily with the right drop and the right kind of material, such as jagged rocks. The Gorilla Glass 5 being used on this device does sort of make up for that plastic frame and gives the device a more premium feel in a certain way, but ultimately it's still plastic. I'd imagine that the Gorilla Glass 5 on the front and the back here would add to any durability factor, and Corning does state that its Gorilla Glass 5 series can withstand a 1.2 meter drop from waist height. However, I do think it depends on how well this plastic frame can disperse any vibrations caused from a drop. Also, what if you're like 8 feet tall with really long legs? I mean, if you drop it from your hip there, maybe that would be more than like 1.2 meters. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud anyway. Of course, you can always circumvent any drops or anything along those lines by getting a glass screen protector in a case, so maybe this doesn't matter to everybody, but just something I noticed, like I said. I know I'm talking a lot about the design here, but I have to mention this bezel for a bit. I truly also thought that we were at the point where we didn't have to worry about any bezels on any smartphones, and I feel like Samsung could have followed the design language of its last and current gen S series, given how many years they've been making and refining designs like this. Maybe this is something most also might not notice, but it's just kind of surprising at this point, I guess. So it feels like I've been talking a lot about the design in a, I guess, what could be perceived a bad way, but I will say this. If you have seen any of my other videos, you've probably picked up the fact that I am not a fan of standard colors. So when I went to purchase this phone, I went straight for this awesome violet color. Now, granted, I still find the naming scheme a little weird. I can say that Samsung calling this color awesome violet was a very good idea. I personally think that this color is amazing, and I hope that they keep this color in their palette of colors for future devices, of course. All right, I swear that's everything I have to say about design though. Let's move on to the next thing. The next aspect that actually stuck out to me is the display, and that is for a couple of reasons. One, I'm actually surprised that this device has a full-on 120 Hz display and not something like a 60 or even a 90 Hz. I actually went in purposely not looking up most of the specs on this device, and I felt that this was a very nice surprise. having a 120 hertz display is something that can either be subtle or noticeable depending on who you are. But personally, I don't think I can ever go back to having a display that has any less of a refresh rate. So it's really cool that this is a feature that has been brought down to Samsung's mid-range devices, or at least the A54 in this case. The next part of the display that was still and is still noticeable for me is the dullness in the colors of the AMOLED panel being used here. If you're used to those punchy, although toned down in this day and age, colors Samsung devices are known for, then you'll probably notice how dull the colors can be on the A54, especially if you have another device to compare this to. Now, this doesn't necessarily take away from the overall experience of using the device, but it is something that is kind of noticeable in different kinds of light. Now, performance is something that we as consumers definitely demand be at least really good for our basic task. So in saying this, the next thing that stuck out to me about my experience is the performance of this device. And I honestly thought that the performance here would be a you get what you pay for moment. Now, I wasn't necessarily surprised either by the performance of this device, and it isn't terrible. And on a basic level, you most likely won't have any issues, but it's when you get to graphically intensive processing that the performance starts to show its limitations. As you can see from this test here, the A54 struggles to keep an acceptable frame rate with graphically intensive content. But honestly though, this isn't really that surprising since this is a mid-range device and not one you actually paid into the 4 digits for. So performance is something that is going to be either hit or miss for you, depending on what you're doing. But just make sure you know if that is graphically intensive processes, you may definitely have an issue. One feature of this device that is basically no compromise is the battery life here. I raved about how good the battery life was on the S23 Ultra and the S23 Plus, but I think the A54 might even be better than both of those. In my rough test, I was able to get more than 2 days by having the device fully charged, then disconnected from the charger in the morning somewhere around 9 or 10 a.m. or maybe one of the times in between those two or a little bit after those two. I then used the device for all my daily tasks, and the only time it took in some form of charge was when I used it for Android Auto navigation. However, most of the times when I was connecting the device via USB to Android Auto, the battery life is basically more sustained than it is charged, if you get what I mean by that. All 3 times I connected it to use Android Auto, my navigation sessions only lasted at most 12 minutes. And then I made sure to take the phone off of the charger. Now, before the device fully died, I checked the battery life and I ended up with 7 hours and 8 minutes of screen on time and 2 days and 6 hours of screen off time, or rather standby time. The A54 actually ended up dying at 6:11 a.m. on May 31st though. Now, needless to say, I was pretty surprised by the battery life on this device because, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I haven't tested a mid-range device in a really long time, I think since 2010, and I remember always thinking to myself that it's interesting that Samsung's previous mid-range devices used to have way bigger batteries than their flagship devices, but still had battery life that wasn't great. The A54 actually has the same battery capacity as the Galaxy S22 Ultra and S23 Ultra, and it lasts longer than both of those devices for obvious reasons that the hardware isn't as powerful as what you'd get with something like Samsung's Ultra series. But I think that the superb battery life of the A54 is its best no compromise feature hands down. And if you are needing a device with really long battery life or decently long battery life, I would definitely take a look into the A54 just for this reason alone. So the last factor I'm going to talk about in my experience with this device so far is the camera experience. And if your first thought is that a mid-range device is going to have mid-range cameras, then you're right. Does this make the cameras on the A54 bad? No, but it also depends on what you're trying to accomplish with pictures you take here. I feel that this camera would be usable and acceptable for the majority of the people looking into this device, but understand that, like the bracket this phone is trying to fit in, these cameras do also have their limitations, and depending on who you are, they might either be negligible or significantly noticeable. Take a look at these few comparison shots I did between the A54 and the Fold 4, since they both have kind of a similar camera setup in a way, and you'll see what I mean. I won't say anything specific about the pictures being shown here because I don't want to sway anybody or make anybody think anything, but the idea is that if you don't find anything wrong with the pictures taken here on the A54 versus the ones on the Fold 4, then you're in a good spot and you shouldn't give any of this photo talk a second thought. However, if you are someone purchasing this phone and kind of trying to cheapen it out and see what you can get with the cameras, you're gonna notice some stuff here. Alrighty, so that is all I really have to say. I mean, technically speaking, that's not all I have to say about this device, but I wanted to keep this video kind of short in a sense. There is still a lot that I am actually putting permanent thoughts to on the A54, but overall, I'm not saying this device is bad or anything along those lines. It's just that you have to really set your expectations. However, I feel like this is really a device that, for a mid-range device, you know, it's pretty up there in terms of what you actually get with it. It's just that I wish there were some aspects that were, I don't know how to say this. I wish there were some aspects of this device that were fleshed out a little bit more. But of course, the review on this device is coming, and I think I'll have a more solid understanding of even what I'm trying to say right now. But if you watch this video all the way through, thank you for watching as always, and wherever you are in the world, have a great day, a great afternoon, a great evening, or a great night, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you for watching. And of course, if you have any questions about the A54, leave those in the comments below. I will try to get back as fast as possible.